we figured we bring Matt in to kind of straighten everybody out on the confusion. If there's one person that can do it, it's got the loveliest blinds in all of Southwest Florida.
Matt, live from my dining room right here.
Right. Aren't we all? So Matt, why don't you just first to kind of explain your job to the folks out there so they understand exactly what you do.
Sure. I am your elected property appraiser. That means my primary responsibility is to come up with an assessed value for every real property parcel in the county. Every house, every office building, every lot has to have a value assigned to it. We have to do that every year as of January 1st. That is the value that then all of the taxing jurisdictions base their tax rates on. So I don't set taxes. I'm not the tax collector. That's a different job. My job is to, as we view it, look out for the best interest, be an advocate for the taxpayer. We don't work for the county or the cities. We are elected directly by the people to set those values. Now, because we are in the business of setting values, that's where we get brought into the process I think you want to talk about this evening, which is what to do next with these properties damaged by the hurricane.
Right. I think some of the confusion started with this map that Lee County had posted on their website that labeled each home a yellow or a red or an orange or a green. What? You're coming through a little scratchy toward the end there. I don't know.
I'll get a little closer to it here.
Yeah, I think it's something with the microphone.
Yeah, it sounds like the microphone, but you're crystal clear. Yeah, we can hear you fine. So, tell us about the map and what function it serves, if any.
Well, that map is the county's first pass at trying to determine what was, demolished completely by the storm, what was seriously damaged by the storm, what has minor damage, and then what wasn't at all. And the purpose of that is really for them to get the big numbers to FEMA. They're negotiating with FEMA on the big disbursements of money. What is the kind of the top level view of the need? The expectation, I think, from everyone is that first pass isn't going to be the final number when it's all said and done. And ultimately, when it comes to your tax assessment, that's going to fall to our office. We're going to actually have to go property by property and make an official determination of each of those conditions, those states of condition, and then determine what impact that has on your value for the assessment and then the downstream taxes from that.
So what phase are we in right now in terms of this 50% thing? Do homeowners on Fort Myers Beach and everywhere, do they know the final number that this 50% is going to be based on?
So let me give you a little background, and that'll help, I think, your listeners. FEMA has a rule about properties that are at flood risk. I think we would all agree that the concept makes sense, right? Because as taxpayers, we all are on the hook to pay for flood losses. Older properties that were built before these flood regulations came into existence, we know eventually they're going to get flooded. We're going to have to, as taxpayers, because FEMA is taxpayer funded, pay out to cover those losses. And they have a rule that if you make a renovation, and that doesn't just apply to a post-storm event, but at any point, if you renovate the home and that substantial improvement, that's a very important phrase, substantial improvement, the value of that substantial improvement is greater than 50% of the market value of the home, then you have to bring the home up to modern flood zone code standards. That may, for some properties, mean you got to tear it down and start over. For other properties, it might mean, lift it up in the air on pilings. Totally depends on the property and what's realistic. But the two components are what you really need to pay attention to. One, is the renovation defined as a substantial improvement? People can go to FEMA's website, see what the four corners of that are. A lot of the properties that we're going to be talking about tonight are dealing with substantial improvement. But make sure you get that and you get comfortable with what that means. From my side, you got market value is what FEMA refers to. There's a lot of definitions of market value. The important thing, I think, for us in Lee County, each of the cities and the county separately have a responsibility to enforce this at the local level. So they have to make their mind up about how they're going to proceed in determining what is market value and then applying that to their permit process. Now, for Lee County, they already have on the books that there are 3 ways that they will accept market value. The first is a private appraisal, and that is always going to be your strongest and best bet. There's no way around that. That is an appraisal that's done based on the pre-storm conditions, so the day before the storm, what was the value of the property. That's up to date. It's highly accurate. It's highly focused on your individual property. That's going to be different in many aspects from what we do. There's 2 big reasons. One, our value date for the tax roll is January 1st. So that was 10 months ago. Now, it's not going to mean that those numbers are going to change radically, but we all know the market moves, and it's going to maybe be different. So on just that one question alone, if your value is close to that 50% and you feel like you may be better off with a private appraisal, that may be one of the reasons why, because you got 10 months of difference in the value date. And the other thing is that market value, as developed through a private fee appraisal, is different than the just value that we determine for your tax basis. And in most scenarios, you can use it as pretty much a rule of thumb. Our just value is going to be lower than a private market value. Part of that is, we as an office don't want to litigate all of our 550,000 parcels every year. So we don't overshoot the mark. We undershoot the mark. We're taxpayer friendly, and we're trying to get it done efficiently and effectively. Our big concern is making sure that everybody has the right relationship to each other, right? $1 million properties are $1 million properties, and $100,000 properties are $100,000 properties, and they have the right relationship in our tax roll so that they're getting taxed equitably. We're not really focused on whether you should be 100,000 or 101,000. That doesn't matter to the end result of what the tax bill is going to be. But what that means is if you then try to use our numbers, you may be lower than what you possibly could get with a private appraisal. Now, having said all that, the Lee County definition gives you 2 other options. You can use our cost approach, depreciated cost approach, or you can use a market value as derived as a factor of our assessed value. And that is what you will find if you go on our website, leepa.org. You pull up your property record. You'll see highlighted in yellow the tax letter. You click on that. It's going to populate for you exactly that number. It's going to break out for you the building value, which is our allocation of your total value. Because remember, it's you got to take the land out. Yep, you got to take the land out. You got to take the non-main building things out. And you're just looking at that allocated value. And in fact, we've updated that letter even a little bit since this version that you see, since Lee County has indicated that that is exactly what they're going to accept, is that line that you have highlighted. So we've trimmed this down and hopefully made it even easier for everybody to understand. But that's the number Lee County says they're going to take. And I would certainly, to the extent I can, encourage the cities to follow suit. Because I think that makes a lot of sense. There's some other issues that come along with that. How many years do you look at, the permit value for the last 5 years? Some jurisdictions do that. I think most that still have that are going to look to move to a single event calculation, so that, the fact that you replaced your roof 2 years ago doesn't count against you in that 50%. But those are decisions the city councils and the county commission have to make. From our role, we've got the tax roll, and we've developed a building value that you can use in this process. And if you're not close, it's going to save you money. You don't have to spend $300 or $400 for a private appraisal. You're well under the 50%. Take this letter, get your permit, and get it done ASAP.
You have a question? Okay. So Matt, you mentioned that you mentioned $300 or $400 because there's a lot of gouging going on. There's a lot of scamming going on. Do you think a private appraisal should run about $300 or $400 no matter what size the house is?
Well, it depends on how it's the complexity. It's not a size question, right?
Okay.
If you live in a neighborhood with all the houses, 200 houses in the neighborhood, and they're all 3,000 square feet, well, that's not really a tough appraisal if you got a bunch of sales down the street. It's really the question of the complexity. So your properties on the beach, those are more complex. They are more challenging. They already were before the storm. much less after the storm. When you're talking about any island property, most of the time the land is a bigger component than the house itself. You know, if you go to look at a house in Lehigh, you know, the lot's worth 15 grand. Well, that's a really small percentage of the overall value. We all know that's not the case on the beach because they're not making any more beach, and the land is worth a lot more than it is up on the mainland. So it's just a complexity question, but your standard typical, appraisal for your typical single family house in Lee County is going to run you $300 or $400.
So Matt, what is the timeline for a process of something like this, and who's in charge of it? There are some people on the beach that are ready to either go or not go. They need somebody to tell them whether they should, tear their house down, or, you know, am I okay? Are these estimates okay? What is the process, and why do people have to wait at this point? Who's in charge of all that? How do we move it along?
Well, and the other thing is there someone that can, if someone has questions like I don't, that's not our situation, but I think I would be overwhelmed with all that information. Is there a professional that can help them kind of go through all that information and make a decision about whether they should go forward, or would that be a lawyer? Would it be an appraiser? Any ideas on that?
Sure. So to that last question, your private appraisers, the experienced ones, the reputable ones, they've dealt with this. They were dealing with it before the storm for renovation projects. You know, people buy an old house on the water and they got to figure out whether they got to tear it down or can they do a reno project. So those appraisers, private appraisers, were already dealing with properties on Sanibel, you know, in the South Cape, in South Fort Myers on the river. They're familiar with this process, and they will help you navigate it and figure out what's best for you. And particularly the reputable ones are gonna talk you through the process and have a good idea whether or not they can help you straight off the bat, and not look to just, you know, charge you a fee just to get some money. They're gonna work to help solve your problem as their client. Now, as a taxpayer, you can always call our office to the extent we are able to help. You know, we're not the permitting agency, so we're not responsible for ultimately issuing that permit, but the permit agencies are relying on us a lot for the number that determines what happens here. So we are involved in that. That's why we developed this letter. It's why we worked with Lee County and are really happy that they've agreed with us and are going to move forward with that allocation that we developed on the building value. And we'll try to help answer the questions the best we can. To Ed's question, it's up to whoever is in charge of your building permits. They are the ones ultimately that are going to have to issue that building permit. The buck stops with them in terms of whether you go or no go on that renovation project. And it just depends on where you live, whether you're dealing with the county or the cities. One thing, though, that I have encouraged people to think about, and this is a really tough decision, like you were saying, it's a overwhelming situation. But you do really want to think about, if you have a house that was completely flooded under, and you know you're dealing with a 50% rule, and you're really pushing up against that limit, and you're trying to decide what to do, I really think you should take some time and contemplate. Do you really want, I mean, even if you can get it to fit right in at 49%, do you want to renovate that house, or should you really think about building new, something that's going to be above the floodplain, is going to be hardened, and is less likely to get that kind of damage next time this happens? Because it will happen again. It will. I don't know when it will. You know, for a lot of us that lived there our whole lives, we've never seen it. I've been here 41 years and never had anything like this, but I suspect that even though almost nobody lived down in the damaged areas back in Hurricane Donna, it probably was a lot like that based on the water, how deep the water was up in downtown Fort Myers back then. So I suspect that you're looking at a 70-year difference. And you go build a house right now, and it's still going to be around 70 years from now. It might happen again.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes down to what people can afford. I mean,
Absolutely.
Most people would prefer to probably build up or build stronger if they had all that money. And then you can see the people that are pushing up against that limit might not be able to afford that. They still have to pay an old mortgage of a house that no longer exists, and now they're trying to meet these new regulations. What is going on? Yeah.
because this comes up a lot. So Cindy asked, can we still add, and we've heard this before, the 20% to the building value as stated on the county's website?
So that is an option, and it's not just 20%. The FEMA talks about using a factor to apply to the number. I think the county's position, and I think this is a very defensible position, is the way that we have now. So used to, if you go back to that letter real quick, used to people would go to our cost approach, the cost value there. You can see there's a huge difference in that building value between the cost and what we've presented the market value. Essentially, for older properties, the cost approach is not a reliable approach. It's very subjective based on depreciation. In appraisal world, you really only rely on the cost approach if you've got a brand new building or a fairly new building. Sometimes you use it when you got a really complicated project that you just have no sales comparisons for. But for particularly all the properties that are going to be in this situation, you didn't ever want the cost approach. So essentially what we've done by changing the paradigm, by moving to an allocation of the just value, is we've done that factor. You can see we're almost 3 times as much in this one letter between the cost value and the market value breakout.
So you're saying that in this, what we're looking at here, that cost value at 258 versus the market value, that's where you're saying it's clearly more than 20%. And so that's already been figured in. Okay.
Yeah. You basically, I want to tell everybody, stick with me on this question. And don't worry about what else you hear. Cause I think what we've done with breaking out the just value is the best position we can put the taxpayers in for what they got to decide to do.
So Matt, but it looks like the person that sent us this in has added the 20% onto that number, but you're saying that that's a no-go.
Well, that's not up to us at the end of the day. That is up to the building department and the jurisdiction. But I want to make sure people understand, in the past, people have talked about using that percentage increase to tack it onto the cost approach. We've never done this allocation. So what's in this letter, that market value column, or really just value, the newest version, it correctly assigns it as just value. That we've never broken it out for people like that before. And I think this is obviously a much better, much more taxpayer friendly position for how this breaks out. And I personally wouldn't worry about the what percentage, because then you're just going to end up arguing about what percentage you should multiply it by. And that really was about recognizing the cost approach is really inefficient and not accurate for older properties.
So in that case, Fort Myers Beach will decide, that municipality will decide whether or not to add that 20% onto that number.
Yes, it's totally up to them. It's up to the permitting department and ultimately then the council, because the council is the policy maker. What they're going to do, how they're going to take the options FEMA gives them. Because again, FEMA gives them a really wide latitude to say what market value is. And the other thing to keep in mind is you always have that first option. So you won't have any kind of percentage addition if you go get a private appraisal.
Right.
The percentage additions are only about trying to guesstimate how to bring up the tax assessed conclusions closer to a private market value conclusion. But if you just go get the appraisal, you eliminate all of that conversation. You're going with the number in the appraisal.
Right. And so what if you add the 20, let's say Fort Myers Beach decides to add the 20 onto that number that we showed you, does that negatively impact how FEMA looks at them in terms of getting them the insurance that they would need next time around?
Well, that's a great question. That's one that I don't have any expertise with. I will tell you, I've heard that part of this process is getting FEMA to agree that the jurisdiction's conclusion of how to process this directly impacts how they get risk rated. So I suspect as the council is presented with these options, that will certainly be part of the conversation. It needs to be one way or the other. We need, the taxpayers need an answer, because it doesn't really do us any good to push these numbers up higher, and then we lose the ability to get the flood insurance anyway. Right.
So what is going on with Cape Coral? There was some reporting that Cape Coral is trying to ease up on some of the regulations. Have you been paying attention to what they're trying to do, and can you explain how they could do that?
Yeah, so the same issue as the county, I think, is looking at. Historically, their current code says that they look at the 5-year cumulative. So if you came in and got a roof permit 2 years ago, and you got a kitchen permit yet last year, they would add all that up and hold that against your 50%. And they're talking about both Lee County and Cape Coral are talking about moving to just a single event consideration. So you just this one permit value versus your 50% cap.
Oh, okay. It sounds like everybody's trying to lean toward that anyway
Mhm.
to help the homeowner. I thought it was something a little more different. I thought it was something different than that, but that makes sense.
Listen, well, there's again, because it's up to them. They've got a lot. They've got the FEMA again gives them wide latitude. I mean, I think in as much as we go back to the last comment, how do you get risk rated and whether you get approved? It's really about making the case as the local jurisdiction that you're being serious in how you develop your policy and meet their expectations to underwrite the program.
Well, and I'm guessing FEMA wants everybody, if they can, to build up on the beach because that's going to be the best thing for the taxpayer who's footing the bill for the flood insurance. And it's going to keep people the safest from something like this again.
Absolutely the case. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the thing to remember. The FEMA flood program is a public taxpayer funded and subsidized program. So every loss, whether it's here or in a farm country in the Midwest, we all pay for that. And so the 50% rule is about trying to, over time, shrink that risk pool down and get people out of the floodplain and get them into safer structures, as you point out.
And I just wanted to ask, when you're talking about the 50% and the replacement costs, what's not included in that figure?
In replacement cost. So replacement cost, honestly, is not our main focus for old properties. I mean, we've got a 500,000 properties more to put a new number on every year, and in the single family set in particular, we've got great sales data. We've got thousands and thousands of houses that sell here every year. So if you really get down into the guts of our property record card, you'll see the sales comparison process is what we put all of our weight on because that's the most accurate. That's what happened this year. You really can't argue with it. It's based on your similar properties that have sold just around you. The cost approach is very abstract. It is a best estimate about what it would cost to build your house new, but then an estimate of depreciation. And that depreciation gets very, very difficult to nail down the older your house gets. And particularly in a market like ours, where you and I would look at it and say, well, that house is 50 years old. I mean, it's got to have 50% depreciation. But because demand has skyrocketed the last 2 years, the market value turns around and says, no, it's only, it might have depreciated 50% 10 years ago, and it's now appreciated. And we saw that happening in large part the last 2 years because just think about it. Every time that you couldn't buy a window at Home Depot, you couldn't buy a door at Home Depot, you couldn't get any tile at Home Depot because of supply constraints. Well, that meant that every one of our windows and doors and tile sitting in our houses was going up in value, right? And so that's why the cost approach gets really, really difficult and inaccurate when you have a very old improvement because you really just guessing, honestly. And when you have a market like what we had the last 2 to 3 years that was going up so incredibly strongly.
And I guess I was alluding to things like that when people are figuring out how much, like if it's a $300,000 home and you're at 50%, so you got 150 to work with, 150,000 to work with. That doesn't include things like surveys, permits, driveways, the pool structures. That stuff is all not calculated in there, correct?
Correct. So, Ed, if you want to put back up that chart real quick, the letter.
Sure.
So the things you just mentioned are in those other lines. So building extra features value, that's probably that we're talking driveways, we're talking sheds, we're talking everything that's an appurtenance to the house, but not a piece of the house directly. Pools get put in. I think pools get put in the building extra value. The land extra features, that's where you're going to see your docks, your lifts, things that, if the house burned, basically things if the house burned down would still be part of the land. Seawalls get put in land extra feature value. That's those other two lines there.
And someone was talking about, well, if they did the work themselves, like the fair market value of the work of the labor, that's where there's some, you can make
Pay
some
yourself minimum wage,
wiggle room in there. Yeah.
right?
Well, yeah, I mean, ultimately the permit value, that's the other part of this equation, right? As you point out, say the building's worth 300,000, so you got 150 to play with. Well, that totally depends on what you bring into the permit office as what this is going to cost. And so, yeah, if you can save some money as being a homeowner permit, that's another way potentially you can get in under that level.
So Matt, last question, and we'll let you go. Is the letters or the information seems to have changed a few times on the Lee County website? Is this it? Is the final, and people can rely on this as the last data to go with?
Well, so the numbers in that column have been the same the whole time. What has changed is how we've presented it. We're trying to answer the common questions we're getting because people are a little confused, and trying to answer the questions we're getting from the jurisdictions. Because again, historically, they've usually just gone to our cost approach value, and they knew where to find that. That was on the property record card. They were used to doing it that way. And the property appraiser's office, confused the building permit officials a little bit because we did something new. We thought it was more correct, and ultimately Lee County has agreed with us that what we have done here is more correct and what they're going to rely on. So if you go and generate that letter on our website, it's going to look a little different than the version you've shown us here tonight, but it's going to be really to the point about here's the number you can use in your 50% rule process per Lee County. And my expectation is hopefully then the cities follow suit and embrace that exact same process.
I know I said it was the last question, but somebody did pop one up there. How do mobile home parks fit into all this?
And manufactured homes, yeah.
Well, it depends on whether you were mobile home and manufactured home are two different things. Depends on whether you were real property, so you paid taxes through the tax collector through our process, or you went and got a registration like a vehicle. Those are two different products. And if you registered like a vehicle, you're exempt from the building code. That's a different thing. Manufactured homes, we're getting a little bit more. Now we got to figure out, are you in a rental community or do you own your lot? If you own your lot, my understanding is you follow most of what we've talked about tonight. I mean, at that point, you're just a different construction process. Everything else is the same. You own the lot, you own the building. You've got to meet the building codes, and those manufactured houses that fit in that paradigm have building code processes already approved by the state of Florida to meet wind standards and flood standards. If you're in a rental park, that's going to be a little different. And the same, so mobile home parks that are rental parks as well as condos are going to be a little different. So if you go to try to pull this letter on your condo unit, you're going to see that we won't generate it for you, because you're going to need to have a discussion with your association. Remember that as a condo owner, you only own the inside of your unit. The association owns the outside of the building. And for the FEMA rule, they've got to put both of those together before they decide what they're going to do on the 50%. So it's a little more complicated for the condo folks, and they're going to have to work through it with their association.
Nothing has been easy for the last 2 years. Nothing.
Station without it being too complicated, and yes, steer right back. One quick one. When you say someone was asking about just value, just value is the same or different than that market value that you put up there?
So we that's one of the changes in the letter. We wanted to make sure that we were more clear, and so that column you'll see in the new letter is titled just value, because that is what we developed in your tax roll. But the paragraph, we've edited the paragraph to explain how Lee County is going to accept that as market value for the FEMA process. Okay. But they are different. They're different definitions. The biggest difference is if you go get an appraisal, they don't deduct the cost of sale, the commission you pay the realtor or your closing costs. Just value, when we develop that tax roll, we have to be pure cash. So when we do all of our research and all of our analysis every year, we have to take out all of the commissions and all of the closing costs. So they're very similar, but they are different at a fundamental level. And we want to make sure we don't, it may be more confusing at the end of the day, but we want to make sure we're right. And everybody's going to learn. Everybody's going to be an expert on the tax roll and FEMA by the end of this process.
Yep.
All right, Matt. Thanks so much for coming on. We always appreciate you coming in, and you're always accommodating whenever we ask. So thank you very much.
Feeling
Absolutely,
this won't
guys.
be the last time either, but thank you very
Thanks, Matt.
much.
Have a
Anytime
great
you want.
night. Appreciate your time. Matt Caldwell, everybody. He's a great guy, and he always comes on whenever we ask him. You're going to need your